Let's take a break from all these sad and depressing mother-in-law stories, and I'm gonna go ahead and tell you guys a happy story that has nothing to do with my mother-in-law, but it was my fiance and my dad, and it was absolutely hilarious. So not too long after Tanner and I started dating, I moved back in with my parents because I was living with the guy that I was dating before Tanner. So when Tanner and I started to get serious and I realized that him and I were going to continue our relationship, I decided that I should probably move out. And so back with my parents I went. When I tell you that my parents loved Tanner, immediately they loved this young man. So much that even right after I moved back in, he was allowed to spend the night. And I had never been allowed to have a guy spend the night. It didn't matter how old I was. I had never been allowed to have a guy spend the night. Now, granted, at this point I was 21 and he was 20, but still, they loved him. Tanner and I would often get in late. So we would get home at probably like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. We would go in the bedroom, we'd go to sleep. We'd wake up the next day and both my parents would already be at work. It was normal. They were gone every day. So my parents were always gone. So one day we wake up and we walk out into the kitchen in our pajamas, aka I'm wearing like a nightie and he's wearing his boxers. And he's standing in the kitchen drinking a water in his boxers. And down the stairs comes my father in his boxers. So here stands my dad and here stands my now fiance, both in their boxers, staring at each other, looking like deer in headlights. Both of them at the same time turned around and walked back to the rooms. So Tanner took off back to the room and I see him putting his jeans on and my dad takes off upstairs and comes back down in some shorts. When they see each other again, they shake hands, they say good morning, and we go about our day. Tanner gets ready and goes to work, and when Tanner goes to work, I go to talk to my dad, who is playing his video game. And I walked into the room and I said, "So, you took the day off of work, huh?" And he laughed and he said, "I could tell that you thought I was at work." And I was like, "He was just getting some water, you know?" And my dad was like, "That boy looked like a deer in headlights." He's like, "And I'm sure I did too." He's like, "That's something that we get to remember for the rest of our lives, was the moment that we met in our underwear in the kitchen." Lesson learned though, because after that, I would always check and make sure that my parents were gone before we came out of the bedroom. Because my bedroom was like right next to the garage. So I would always go and make sure that they were gone before he came trotting out in his underwear to avoid that uncomfortable situation ever happening again. However, now it's a story that gets told at family events and we love it, and I'm so glad that it happened because it was kind of just a cute little bonding moment for my dad and my now fiance, and they get that story for the rest of their lives, and that's a fun story, and I don't really have a lot of those with, Tanner's family, so I love that he has those kinds of stories to tell with my family.